Financial managers' ultimate goal should be maximization of the share price. To achieve this goal, the firm has to be profitable, and all else equal, more profits should make the share price higher. We will measure profit with the return on equity, or ROE, which is the net income divided by shareholders' book equity. It is the shareholders for whom the financial manager should be concerned. Therefore, the ROE is an appropriate profitability ratio on which to focus. It tells us how many cents of profit are earned for every dollar that the shareholders have put directly into the company. Suppose the net income is $50 million and book value of equity is $500 million. The ROE would be 50 million divided by 500 million equals 10%. The reasonable questions that the financial manager of this company should ask herself are, can we achieve an ROE greater than 10%? If so, then what should we focus on to improve? To answer these questions, first we need to find a similar company, such as a competitor with whom to compare. Then we will use the DuPont equation. The DuPont equation expands the simple formula ROE equals net income divided by equity into three other financial ratios, which are profit margin, total asset turnover, and the equity multiplier. Profit margin is net income divided by sales. This tells us how many cents a company earns for every dollar it receives in sales. Think of this as a measure of pure profitability. Total asset turnover is sales divided by total assets. This tells us how many times a dollar spent on assets is returned in sales. This is a measure of operational efficiency. The equity multiplier is total assets divided by total equity. This tells us how much debt the company has taken on. While more debt increases the expected ROE, it also exposes the shareholders to greater financial risk to achieve that higher ROE. The product of the profit margin, total asset turnover, and equity multiplier equals the ROE. We use the relationship of these three ratios with ROE to diagnose how ROE could be increased or whether it should be increased at all. For example, if a corporation's ROE is below its competitor's ROE because its profit margin is below its competitor, then the financial manager might try cutting expenses. Using the DuPont equation will allow you as a financial manager to identify which area to focus on to improve ROE with the ultimate goal of maximizing the share price. We're given information about Pearson and Scholastic in this table. We're asked what is the ROE of Pearson and Scholastic, and then what Scholastic needs to do with its profit margin to match Pearson's ROE. Let's review the DuPont equation, which says that the ROE is equal to the profit margin times the total asset turnover times the equity multiplier. Let's also review why this relationship holds. The definition of the return on equity is net income divided by equity. And the definitions of the right-hand side financial ratios are net income divided by sales for the profit margin, sales over assets for the total asset turnover, assets over equity for the equity multiplier. And we can see that the sales would cancel out, assets cancels out, and indeed the right-hand side equals the left-hand side. Now let's calculate the ROEs of the two companies, plugging in the values in the table into this equation, giving us an ROE of 7.10% for Pearson and an ROE of 1.58% for Scholastic. So we see that indeed Pearson's ROE is much higher than Scholastic's. We can see that it is because the profit margin of Scholastic's is far less than Pearson's. Holding the total asset turnover and equity multiplier constant, we want to find out what new profit margin Scholastic would need to have a ROE of 7.10%. So let's set up this equation for a new ROE of 7.10%, solving for a new profit margin, holding the total asset turnover and equity multiplier constant. rearranging this will give us a new profit margin of 5.45%. Let's also make a few more observations. Notice that Scholastic's total asset turnover is actually twice as high as Pearson's total asset turnover. Therefore, Scholastic has much more efficiency than Pearson. Also notice that the equity multiplier of Pearson is greater than Scholastic's. It means that Pearson's financial risk is greater than Scholastic's. So Scholastic could increase its profit margins, cutting costs on inputs or cutting overhead. Then it would have the same ROE as Pearson, but with less financial risk than Pearson. Pearson, on the other hand, has room to improve because while it has a higher ROE, its efficiency is half that of Scholastic's, and it is doing this with more risk to the shareholders.